Most people say they want to change their life. They say it with passion, with conviction, sometimes even with tears in their eyes. But here's the truth Machiavelli would whisper if he were sitting across from you. Most people don't actually want change. They want the comfort of imagining it. They want the fantasy of transformation without the violence it requires. Because to change your life for real is not a gentle act. It's a political coup against your own mind. Machiavelli believed that every form of transformation, whether it's a state rising from ashes or a man remaking himself, starts from a single brutal realization. The old order must die. You can't negotiate with the person you used to be. You can't politely ask your habits, your fears, your weaknesses to leave. You have to overthrow them. And that's why most people stay stuck. They keep holding elections inside themselves when what's needed is a revolution. If you want to change your life, you must start with a power grab inside your own head. The first move Machiavelli would make isn't to motivate you, it's to destabilize you. He'd strip you of the illusion that you can slowly ease into transformation. Because true change doesn't happen gradually, it happens suddenly after long preparation. Think about it. A bridge doesn't collapse slowly. It weakens silently. Then one day, everything falls at once. Change feels the same. There's a breaking point where the old version of you can't hold the new one anymore. So Machiavelli would tell you, stop aiming to improve. Improvements are safe. They preserve the old system. You can improve a habit while keeping your comfort. But change, real change, requires betrayal. Betrayal of your own routines. Betrayal of the beliefs that once protected you. If you want to live differently, you must first stop being loyal to what made you survive. Ask yourself this. Which parts of your life are you still protecting out of habit? The friendships that drain you? The patterns that make you predictable? Machiavelli would see those as weak alliances. He'd dissolve them ruthlessly. Because in his mind, the one who hesitates to remove what's useless becomes enslaved by it. That's why he'd begin not with action, but with clarity. Before you do anything, before you start a business, end a relationship, or change direction, you must map the territory of your own corruption. Where are you still pretending? Where are you lying to yourself to avoid discomfort? The enemy of your transformation isn't ignorance, it's comfort disguised as reason. The mind whispers, be patient, be realistic, take your time. But patience is often cowardice wearing a crown. Here's a truth that most can't swallow. You will never feel ready. The moment you wait for, the perfect mix of courage, time, and resources, doesn't exist. Machiavelli would laugh at the idea of readiness. He'd remind you that power belongs to those who move before they're prepared. The king doesn't wait for certainty. He declares it. To actually change your life, you must think like a ruler, not a servant. A ruler doesn't ask permission to change. He decides, and then makes the decision right through sheer consistency. That's what people misunderstand about transformation. They think it's about emotion. It's not. It's about strategy. Emotion makes you want to change. Strategy makes you actually do it. Machiavelli's first rule for change would be this: build power, not motivation. Motivation is wind. It disappears. Power is architecture. It stays. You build it through structure, through eliminating loopholes, through designing an environment that leaves no room for weakness. For instance, if you want to stop wasting time, don't try to resist distraction. Destroy the conditions that make distraction easy. Delete the app. Block the access. Move the temptation out of reach. Machiavelli would call this the strategy of preemptive control. Don't fight weakness when it attacks. Starve it before it arrives. And if you fail? Good. Failure is intelligence in disguise. He'd tell you to dissect your losses like a strategist after battle. Don't judge yourself. Study the terrain. Ask, what made me lose ground? What pattern did I underestimate? What ally, meaning what part of my own mind, betrayed me? He'd also tell you this: don't confuse motion for change. Many people spend their lives rearranging the same pieces, calling it progress. They switch jobs, move cities, start new habits, but the architecture of their thinking stays the same. If you don't redesign your inner government, you'll keep recreating the same tyranny in different forms. That's why true change begins with mental consolidation. You can't be at war within yourself and expect peace outside. Machiavelli would order your mind like a ruler stabilizing a newly conquered land. Identify the rebels, those parts of you that resist discipline, that sabotage progress with doubt. Then, instead of destroying them outright, redirect them. Every trait has value when ruled properly. Your laziness can become strategic patience. Your anger can become precision. Your fear can become awareness. The goal is not to eliminate chaos, but to govern it. This is how power grows quietly inside you. When every emotion, every weakness, every habit is reassigned to serve your higher purpose. Change, then, isn't about becoming someone else. It's about reorganizing who you already are. But even this realization is dangerous without one key ingredient: self-respect. Machiavelli would warn that if you treat yourself like a peasant, you'll live like one. If you keep breaking your own word, you're training your mind to view you as unreliable. And no kingdom stands when its ruler is not trusted. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow," and don't, your mind loses respect for your command. It stops listening. It revolts. So begin with small decrees that you actually obey. Wake up at the time you said you would. Finish what you promised. Not for productivity's sake, but to reestablish authority over your life. Machiavelli's brilliance was in understanding that loyalty must be enforced, even within oneself. Discipline is not punishment. It's a reminder of who's in charge. And as you rebuild that internal respect, something shifts. You stop negotiating with weakness. You stop explaining your intentions to people who haven't earned your honesty. You start acting like a ruler whose silence means more than others' noise. That's the kind of change that rewires not just your life, but how the world responds to you. Machiavelli would tell you to embrace silence during your transformation, because the most dangerous moment in any rise to power is exposure before stability. People destroy their own momentum by announcing it too early. You start something new, tell everyone about it, and then lose the hunger that made you start. Silence keeps the fire inside the walls. That's how rulers move. Quietly, strategically, with no need for applause. The world sees the results, not the process. But let's be honest, change is ugly. You'll lose people who preferred your older, weaker self. You'll outgrow rooms that once felt safe. And the mind will try to drag you back under the illusion of balance. But balance doesn't exist when you're climbing out of chaos. There's only survival and consolidation. Machiavelli would call this period your necessary cruelty. You'll have to say no more often. You'll have to disappoint others to remain loyal to your direction. He'd remind you that mercy before mastery is weakness. Be ruthless now so that you can be generous later. And here's the paradox. When you start ruling your life like this, the very things that once enslaved you begin to work for you. Your insecurities become data. Your mistakes become teachers. You develop what Machiavelli would call useful suspicion, the ability to doubt not from fear, but from intelligence. You stop reacting and start calculating. Every day becomes a battlefield where you're not just surviving, but testing your strength. And once you realize that the battlefield is mostly internal, external problems lose their power to intimidate you. Because in truth, the hardest part of change isn't letting go of the old. It's accepting that no one is coming to save you. You are both the ruler and the ruled, the commander and the soldier, the rebel and the law. Once you understand that, change stops being an idea and becomes your nature. That's when life starts to respond differently to you. The chaos outside mirrors your new order inside. Opportunities appear not because the world changes, but because you finally do. And this is where the transformation truly begins. When the person you used to be starts fearing the one you're becoming. That's how you know you're on the right path. When you start intimidating your own past. When your old self can't recognize your new decisions. When your silence becomes louder than your explanations. Because at that point, you're no longer seeking change. You've become it. Change always begins invisibly. It starts in moments when no one's watching, when you're sitting in silence, realizing the war you've been fighting wasn't against the world, it was against your own submission to it. Machiavelli would tell you that most people live like conquered cities. Their fears rule them, their habits tax them, and their routines patrol their borders. To change your life, you must first reclaim your inner sovereignty. But here's the catch. Power, whether in politics or in the soul, can't just be seized. It has to be stabilized. After the initial rebellion, after that first surge of motivation, most people lose control because they never learn how to govern what they've conquered. They overthrow one habit and let another rise in its place. They burn their old routines but never build new laws. Machiavelli warned rulers that revolutions fail not because of opposition, but because of poor management afterward. The same applies to your transformation. The first wave of change feels like freedom. The second wave tests whether you can handle it. And that's where most people fall. They confuse excitement for progress, chaos for momentum. Machiavelli would say, "Do not mistake noise for victory. Silence is where the real victories happen." You see, when you start changing, your mind will resist. It will use every trick of statecraft to bring back the old order, nostalgia, guilt, rationalization. It will whisper, "You've earned a break. You're not that bad. It's fine if you slip just once." These are not random thoughts. They're the old ministers of your inner court trying to regain power. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly. When a ruler takes over a corrupt state, the first thing he must do is eliminate the influence of the previous regime. You can't reform corruption. You must replace it. So when your mind begins that inner negotiation, don't argue, don't reason, act. The more you talk with your weakness, the stronger it becomes. A ruler does not debate with traitors, he removes them. That means cutting off behaviors, conversations, even environments that drag you back. If something constantly tempts you to return to your old life, it's not just a distraction, it's an infiltration. This is why environment design is one of Machiavelli's hidden principles of change. He knew that power is not sustained by willpower alone. It's sustained by control over conditions. The ruler who allows enemies to move freely within his territory doesn't lose because he's weak. He loses because he's careless. In your life, those enemies are often disguised as comfort. Easy access to your distractions, old friends who don't grow, the patterns that make failure feel familiar. You can't negotiate with them. You must exile them. And yes, it will feel ruthless. Because it is. Machiavelli never promised peace to those seeking power. He promised dominance to those willing to face discomfort. When you start cutting off the unnecessary, people will call you cold. But he would remind you that every great transformation requires a reputation of harshness at first. The world respects clarity, not confusion. When your decisions become sharp, your respect multiplies. He'd also remind you that nothing threatens the old order like consistency. Anyone can act once with power. Few can repeat it. The secret to ruling your mind is repetition without emotion. You wake up, you execute, you repeat. Not because you feel like it, but because it's law now. Machiavelli knew that repetition was how power becomes culture. A ruler doesn't rely on inspiration. He relies on ritual. Think about it. If you repeat an action long enough, it no longer requires belief. The act becomes identity. When you do what you said you'd do enough times, you stop doubting who you are. You don't try to become disciplined. You just are. That's the moment transformation becomes irreversible. But before that, there's chaos. And Machiavelli would tell you to welcome it, because disorder is proof that your system is changing. When a city reforms, riots break out. When a person reforms, inner turmoil follows. The difference between failure and transformation is whether you interpret that chaos as a sign to stop or as proof that you're on the right track. During this phase, your emotions will fluctuate violently. One day you'll feel unstoppable. The next, you'll question everything. Machiavelli would call this the period of uncertainty, the moment when the throne is still unstable and every weakness tries to rise. He'd say, "Do not announce victory too soon. Most people quit when they're one battle away from order." And here's something crucial. Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to suppress emotion. He'd tell you to weaponize it. He saw emotions as resources, not enemies. Anger sharpens focus. Fear fuels caution. Sadness deepens understanding. You don't eliminate emotion, you assign it purpose. That's what separates strength from repression. The man who feels nothing is not powerful. He's brittle. The one who governs his feelings is unshakable. This is the kind of psychological governance that leads to permanent change. Because once you learn to rule your mind like that, the outside world loses leverage. People can provoke you, but they can't move you. You stop chasing validation because your approval comes from your own execution. Machiavelli would see that as the ultimate form of self-rule, the moment when no external ruler can control you through praise or punishment. But there's another dimension he'd want you to understand: perception. He wrote that every ruler must manage how they are seen, not because of vanity, but because perception governs influence. To change your life effectively, you must also change how the world perceives your transformation. Stop explaining your growth. Let people adapt to your silence. Stop seeking credit. Let the new version of you become undeniable through action. Machiavelli believed that mystery amplifies power. When people can't predict your next move, they begin to respect it. In your own transformation, that means saying less about what you're working on and doing more in private. The more unpredictable you become, the harder it is for others to control your direction. The same principle applies to your inner state. Don't let every thought become a confession. Some goals need to live in secrecy until they're strong enough to survive exposure. He'd also warn you about the illusion of balance that destroys so many attempts at change. Everyone wants balance between their old comfort and their new direction. But balance is just compromise disguised as wisdom. In war, there's no balance, only strategy. And in transformation, there's no balance, only focus. Machiavelli would urge you to accept imbalance temporarily, to tilt your entire energy toward reconstruction. You can rest later, when the system stabilizes. And yes, this requires isolation. Every ruler who rises spends time in solitude, not to escape, but to observe. Silence reveals what noise hides. When you stop filling your mind with input, your real thoughts emerge. Most people avoid silence because it confronts them with how little they actually know about themselves. But that's precisely where power begins. Solitude, to Machiavelli, wasn't loneliness, it was reconnaissance. You study yourself like a state studies its borders. You identify weak points, old wounds, forgotten ambitions. You look at your life not as a victim, but as a strategist. And from that perspective, every pain starts to make sense. Every betrayal becomes intelligence. Every failure becomes territory reclaimed. And when you reach that level of awareness, change stops feeling like effort. It starts feeling like alignment. You stop forcing growth because it becomes your natural motion. You stop trying to convince yourself because you've already seen the evidence. Machiavelli would call this the turning point of control, when you no longer need to threaten yourself into discipline because your life has become structured around it. That's the moment you become dangerous, because the man who no longer needs motivation cannot be manipulated by it. The one who moves from law, not emotion, commands himself completely. And when you can command yourself, there's nothing left to fear because fear itself begins obeying you. But even then, Machiavelli would whisper a warning. Power fades without vigilance. The moment you think you're safe, you're not. The moment you think I've changed for good, your old habits regroup. The throne of the mind requires constant awareness. You don't have to fight every day, but you must watch every day. Because the same way you conquered yourself once, complacency will try to conquer you again. That's why change never ends. It just becomes quieter, more refined, more internal. The early chaos turns into order, and that order turns into mastery. But mastery isn't about control anymore, it's about peace. Not the peace of inaction, but the peace of knowing that whatever happens, you will rule yourself through it. And that's when transformation is complete. Not when life gets easier, but when you stop flinching at its difficulty. When the very things that used to break you now become reminders of how far you've come. When your pain no longer defines you, it obeys you. Because that's the Machiavellian way to change your life. Not by wishing for it, not by announcing it, but by ruling yourself until the world has no choice but to adapt to your new order. Most people think changing their life is about adding more habits, more routines, more affirmations. But Machiavelli would laugh at that. He'd say, no kingdom grows stronger by adding new lands while its core remains weak. The true art of transformation is subtraction. You don't change your life by adding new behaviors. You change it by removing everything that weakens your command over yourself. Look around your life for what doesn't belong. The conversations that drain you, the distractions that consume you, the rituals that feel harmless but waste your sharpest hours. Machiavelli would see those as rival factions within your empire, and he'd advise you to deal with them swiftly, not sentimentally. Sentiment is the assassin of self-rule. He'd tell you something even colder. Don't just cut off people or habits, cut off identities. You are loyal to too many versions of yourself. The hard-working one, the kind one, the forgiving one, the fearful one. Each demands energy. Each pulls in a different direction. Machiavelli would command you to consolidate power, to choose a single identity aligned with your ambition and dissolve the rest. This is where most fail, because identity feels sacred. You've built it for years. But Machiavelli would ask, what is sacred about a lie? If the identity that once helped you survive is now keeping you small, it must go. The only thing sacred in his world is evolution. He'd also remind you that no ruler maintains power without propaganda. In your case, propaganda is the narrative you tell yourself daily. If your story is weak, your rule will crumble. Most people repeat mental propaganda that enslaves them. I'm too old. I'm too damaged. I don't have time. Machiavelli would replace those with narratives that create motion. I have no choice but forward. Every disadvantage is raw material. Power begins wherever I decide. That's not delusion, it's strategic storytelling. Rulers use myth to unify their kingdoms. You use it to unify your mind. If you repeat a story long enough, the body begins to obey it. And once the body obeys, the world adjusts. Now, let's talk about timing. The element Machiavelli believed separated masters from amateurs. Most people ruin their transformations not because they move too fast, but because they move at the wrong time. They rush decisions when silence was needed, or they hesitate when aggression was demanded. Machiavelli studied rulers who rose and fell, and he concluded something ruthless. Fortune favors the decisive, but only when the decisive understand rhythm. He'd tell you to develop a sense for psychological timing. When your mind is weak, act fast. Strike before doubt multiplies. When your mind is strong, wait, let power ferment. In life, there are moments to move like fire and moments to move like stone. Knowing which one to be is what makes you unstoppable. And here's a lesson he'd whisper only to the ones truly ready. Change isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming untouchable. Better is comparative. It means you still measure yourself by others. Untouchable means your standard has become internal. When you reach that point, competition feels irrelevant. You no longer chase validation because your focus is domination, of self, not others. He'd teach you to measure progress differently. Don't ask, am I happier? Ask, am I stronger? Happiness is a feeling. Strength is a foundation. Happiness depends on external order. Strength creates it. Machiavelli's world wasn't built on comfort. It was built on command. But command without reflection turns into tyranny. That's why he'd tell you to schedule introspection like a ruler inspects his walls. Not out of softness, but maintenance. Sit in silence and study your reactions. Where did emotion control you today? Where did fear slow you down? That's your daily audit of power. Over time, this creates psychological sovereignty, an inner authority so firm that no external chaos can shake it. You begin to sense when someone's influence tries to infiltrate you. You see manipulation in tone, weakness in disguise, fake flattery as poison. Machiavelli would smile at that awareness. He called it seeing the invisible mechanics of power. Once you can see them, you can never be ruled again. But don't mistake sovereignty for isolation. Machiavelli didn't believe in loneliness. He believed in selective alliance. In your transformation, you'll meet people who challenge your power, not through resistance, but through reflection. The ones who don't compete with your strength but expand it. Those are the allies worth keeping. They don't demand your loyalty, they earn it. Still, you must remain cautious. The closer someone gets to your center, the greater their potential for betrayal. That's not paranoia, it's realism. Machiavelli would advise you to always keep one truth hidden from everyone, even those closest to you. Your ultimate motive. The ruler who exposes every intention invites attack. You should do the same. Keep one layer of mystery alive, not to deceive, but to protect. The unknown keeps power breathing. And when you fail, and you will, don't see it as punishment. Machiavelli would call it data. Failure is the scout that reports back from the front lines of your own limits. Study it, integrate it, but never dwell. He'd say, the weak make failure their story. The strong make it their instruction. Every fall should end with one sentence. Now I know where not to step. That's progress. Over time, something strange begins to happen. You stop fearing discomfort. You start craving it. Because you realize it's proof that you're expanding your domain. The pain of growth becomes a sign that the walls of your old self are cracking. Machiavelli would call this the beauty of controlled destruction, the art of breaking what no longer serves, even when you built it yourself. And as you live this way, you start to notice a quiet transformation. The noise of the world fades. The urgency to explain yourself disappears. The desire to please turns into the ability to observe. You become what Machiavelli admired most, the composed one in chaos, the person whose silence commands more attention than others' speeches. That's the end game of change. Not to have more, not to be liked more, but to embody an inner order so precise that the world bends to it. You stop chasing balance and start radiating stability. You stop trying to be understood and start becoming undeniable. When you reach that stage, life begins to move differently around you. People sense it before they can name it. They hesitate before wasting your time. They measure their words more carefully. And opportunities, those strange, invisible openings that never appeared before, start showing up effortlessly. That's not luck. That's alignment. Because Machiavelli would say, once you learn to govern yourself perfectly, the universe treats you like a ruler too. It responds to your command. And that's how you actually change your life. Not by fighting the world, not by seeking endless advice, but by turning yourself into someone whose very existence shifts the order of everything around them. When you reach that point, you don't need to prove change anymore. You've become the proof.